Moderating for the fifth panel, once I flip to my actual page, is going to be Everton Lewis, who is a partner at Impact Signal. And then on the panel, we're going to have Stephen Woods, co-founder and CTO at Nudge.ai. We're going to have Alison Simpson, CMO and founder at Forerunner Marketing Limited. We'll also have Masoum Mosmer, data scientist at Wayfair, which I'm actually using to go purchase some new furniture for my new place, and Jeff Wilts, global head of data service at Fleet Complete. So without further ado, we're going to get into our Customer Experience Reimagined panel. Thank you very much.
Hello? Hello? Okay, great. Thank you. Before we get started, I'm actually going to ask everyone to stand up. Stand up, please. Stand up. It's been a long day, been great panels, but I think before we start our customer experience reimagined, we need to get some blood pumping, right? When you're thinking about imagination, creativity, you need that blood pumping. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is just stretch. Stretch as high as you can. All right. Then I'm going to ask you to go down, touch your toes. Don't hit your head on the seat. Cushions, please. All right, thank you. Okay, stretch to the right, stretch to the right, stretch to the left. All right, and then one more time, straight up. All right, excellent. And then last thing, I'm going to ask you to high five 3 people around you, okay? 3 people. High five, high five. Okay. So don't sit down, don't sit down, don't sit down, don't sit down. That was the last activity that I wanted you to do, but I want you to do one more thing before you go back to your seat. I want you to actually turn to someone near to you, next to you, either on your right or your left, you can choose. And I want you to think about a customer experience that delighted you or was exceptional. And I want you to share that with the person that you're talking to, okay? It could be as a customer, so you received that service and it delighted you, right? Or it could be, I think where you're talking about something that you actually delivered to someone else, correct? Okay, so either one's fine. But just think about an exceptional customer experience, something that delighted you. If I could ask the two of you to, or you as well, to share between each of you. All right, does anybody need more time? Anybody need more time? Okay, once you've actually shared, can you sit down? Can you sit down? Okay, so potentially we have a lot of different experiences that were talked about in the room. I would like to ask one person to share. Just share a specific customer experience that came up in the conversation that you just had. Up there at the top? There's someone at the top? Okay. Oh, so someone tried to sell you a credit card one time? Yeah. So what was exceptional about the experience? He was really nice about it. And can we dive a little bit more into that nice? What made him nice? My friend. He was your friend. Okay, well. So was there anything he was able to do as a friend that really made the experience different? No? No? Okay. Well, can we have another volunteer? Talk about their customer experience. Oh, okay. Got Mike running over there.
I had 2 accounts accidentally at Netflix that were activated, and I didn't know the other one was activated because I'm a terrible person and don't check my visa statement all the time. And when I realized, I called in, and they were able to look it up through my visa number because I didn't know the account number, and I couldn't deactivate it because it just signed on to the other account. And they looked it up through my visa, deactivated it, and then gave me 6 months worth of free service.
Nice.
And it was like a 10-minute phone call
Nice.
and like just a random support person.
Okay. Did it feel like it was personalized, that they were actually trying to work with you and give you something specific that and help you out?
It like wasn't even that. It was just the fact that they didn't even like, I didn't have to complain. I didn't have to like ask for a manager or supervisor like you would do if you were to call like Rogers or something.
Okay, no names, please. No names, please. Don't want to get in trouble.
But like I didn't say anything, and I was just like, yeah, I just need to like cancel it. You know, it's my bad. I had it active. I didn't check. Like, it's not a big deal. And then they just like complimentary 6 months. Here you go, because you had 2 accounts activated by accident.
Okay, perfect. So the panel today is going to be talking about customer experience, specifically customer experience reimagined. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to ask the panelists to talk a little bit about themselves, okay, share a little bit about their journey, and then we're going to spend the next hour diving into a couple themes. So prior to this, I guess, panel, we jumped on the phone and we talked a little bit, shared a bit about our experiences, and what we're aiming to do is provide some perspectives, different perspectives here on the panel that we have, so that you can take that away and think about, what do I need to do in my job? What do I need to think about as we consider the future of customer experience? Okay, so I'm going to ask Steve to kick things off.
Sure. So my name is Steve Woods. Pleasure to be here. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called Nudge.ai. We're focused on business-to-business sales, working to make the selling experience better for sales leaders that we serve. I've been doing that for a few years. Prior to that, had a very similar role, CTO and co-founder of a company in the marketing space, a company called Eloqua that was ultimately sold and is now part of Oracle. They're working again with a business-to-business environment to work on the marketing side of the revenue funnel. So I've dabbled in the end-to-end experience of purchasing products from marketing through to sales, but most of it really coming from a business-to-business perspective.
I'm Alison Simpson. I'm the CMO and founder of Forerunner Marketing. I've grown up in the marketing world. I've run a number of different agencies and brand consultancies, and I've also been responsible for marketing and customer experience in a number of different organizations. Holt Renfrew, I was the SVP of marketing and customer experience. I also worked in marketing at Rogers, so I can relate to the example of not always the best customer experience, and you learn from the pain. And I also worked with a hotel company. So I've had the pleasure of working across very diverse industries, everything from Tim Hortons to Apple to pharmaceutical. And I launched Forerunner to really deliver fractional chief marketing officer services to early stage companies and very entrepreneurial organizations. I've been doing it for a couple of years now and absolutely loving it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Masoum Mosmer. I work at Wayfair. And so my most recent experience has been focused on trying to anticipate what customers need and building algorithmic marketing and personalization systems. Prior to Wayfair, I was director of machine learning at RBC, working on something kind of similar, but different domain space, obviously. And then prior to that, I did start my career in brick and mortar retail. So also having the pleasure of kind of trying a few different things, and happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wilts. I'm the Global Head of Data Services at Fleet Complete. We're a subscription-based business that does telematics and vehicle tracking. Prior to that, I spent a number of years in retail, always on the data analytics integration side. Before that was with Teradata, working at some of the big banks. And before that, it was in the Canada Post group of companies for 7 years, with working with Purolator and Canada Post, et cetera. Have lots of experience in terms of standing up the technologies to enable better customer experience. How do you connect different systems together in graph databases? How do you stand up the data warehouses to be able to actually link all the disparate bits of junky data together so that you can turn them into real insights?
Fantastic, thank you. So one of the things that we've talked about in the past with the panel is the fact that things are getting more complicated, right? So it's actually maybe easier to make a product or to actually develop a product, but it's harder to actually get people to pay attention. There's lots of things happening in the environment, outside in the world, that are trying to draw people's attention. And one of the things that organizations are starting to do now is they're starting to think about that customer experience, right? What can they do that can actually grab people's attention, get them to use the product, stay sticky with that product or service? And one of the things that's being considered is really thinking about how they can make services or products more personalized. But then there's also a balancing act, right, between making something more personal and also protecting privacy. So the first topic area that we're going to kick off with is really talking about and thinking about that balance between personalization and privacy and the implications for the customer experiences that we want to create for the future. So on this topic, I'm going to ask Alison to just kick us off and share some of her thoughts. And then from there, we're going to ask the panelists to add anything that they would like to add to the topic.
So I will start by saying I'm surrounded by 3 deep data technology experts, and I am sort of the odd woman standing. I have built my career on being a user and consumer of data and really looking at the role of data to better understand customers and deliver business outcomes. So I have huge respect for my colleagues on the panel and know that they will absolutely be able to elaborate quite significantly on my starting points. It's not just companies and people like us that are trying to balance the desire for personalization and the desire for privacy. Since this is a data conference, I'll start with a few data points. In a recent IBM study, 81% of consumers said that they were increasingly concerned about what companies were going to do with their data, but 79% also said they were absolutely happy to share data as long as there was value for them in doing so and benefits. So that as consumers, they're also grappling with what is the right balance, and that really comes down to a willingness to share data with a company that has earned your trust and is willing to work hard to keep your trust. So I would start with the advice by saying, just because you can collect a data point does not mean you should. And every piece of information that you collect and every question that you ask a consumer to respond to, I think you first need to start by asking yourself, do I really need this data? As importantly, perhaps more importantly, can I action this data, or is this just wishful thinking on my company's part right now? Because if you can't action it and deliver a fairly tangible benefit in fairly short order, you're going to be disappointing a customer, and it's going to be harder for them to be willing to share their data down the road. If you answer those 2 questions and say absolutely, then I would say, so why? What are you going to do with it? And perhaps the most important question, how will it benefit the people that you're asking to share the data? If you can answer each of those questions and know that you're not just going to be benefiting your business, you're also going to be benefiting your customer, I think that is a very powerful starting point. From my perspective, in many ways, data collection and data management has some strong analogies to dating. So if you think about being on your first date, there are certain questions that you'd be comfortable asking and comfortable answering, and if they were too many questions, too intimate a questions, you'd probably go running in the other direction. As we're building a relationship with our customers and prospects, you need to be very respectful of what question you're asking and when you're asking it. And as you build and strengthen that relationship and show them consistently that you're providing benefits and value to them for the information that they're sharing, and again, earning their trust, then I think you can advance the relationship and ask more in-depth and collect more in-depth data. So that's how I would start it, and I'd open it up to my panel to jump on.
Maybe I'll jump in first. So, yeah, fantastic start. I would definitely layer on to that. If you look at the idea of personalization and to sort of take Alison's remarks and kind of get to some of the whats that you do, one of the things I found with organizations that try and build products or services around data and the conversation of personalization comes up, the word personalization kind of throws a wrench into a lot of thinking. We tend to overthink it a lot. We tend to think, okay, how do I make this creatively unique for a person? They like dogs, so I'm going to put pictures of dogs on things. That's not the kind of personalization that we all probably had in mind when we were thinking of amazing customer experiences. A lot of the experiences that are great are experiences that you barely even notice. You call someone on the phone and they can look up your account number. You log into a system and it knows what you did last and kind of puts that front and center. A lot of the personalization is just saying, make this experience reflect what data I have given you by my actions historically. Don't try and go all creative with the personalization, just make it not suck with the personalization.
Like putting lipstick on a pig? Is that what you're saying?
I would add on to both of those items in that as we're standing up organizations, we have to look at the policies and the procedures and the things that we're doing internally, because data is changing so fast, systems are changing so fast, use cases are changing so fast. And I may have collected data for one purpose, but then I'm going out and I'm looking at open data and I'm looking at other data sources and various things that I bought, and I'm combining it in unique and interesting ways. Lo and behold, you have now kind of passed a threshold. And that threshold is what I often refer to as the creepy factor. And what that creepy factor is now you've taken data and you've done something with it that if you are explaining to somebody, they go, ooh. And you want to be able to put in your policies and your procedures in such a way that you're training people that it's not rules-based, but it's behaviors-based. And it's behaviors-based in the sense of if what you're doing can't get published on page 2 of the business section, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And training people in such a way that as they're looking at their data and as they're looking at different ways of segmenting and as they're doing all kinds of other things, they're keeping that threshold and that creepy factor in mind, and you're training people on behaviors as opposed to a complete rules base. Because if you put rules in front of people, people will always find the loophole. If you put behaviors in front of people, then it becomes a little bit more of a moral guide as you're going through and trying to figure out how to get that balance right.
So Jeff, a follow-up question there. As a large organization, how do I know what's going to be creepy?
Well, that's where the page 2 test comes in. I mean, there's lots of examples. Doesn't take too hard to look. There's that one chain where dad found out that his daughter was pregnant when the Welcome to New Mom kit showed up at home because the predictive analytics algorithm indicated that there was somebody pregnant in the household. That's creepy. There's no other way to describe that, right? That's well past the line. And so you actually want to be able to go through your organization and be able to figure out what that creepy level is. And I realize it's a little bit nebulous, but that's the only way that I can think of describing it.
So I'll add a slightly different lens, which maybe isn't that popular, but the way I think of it is as a data scientist, as the person trying to move personalization forward, it's almost like we got to do our jobs and like maximize personalization, and then have really other people in the organization that are also really strong and also really involved that kind of push back so we can find the right balance. It's really hard to say what's creepy because 10 years ago, a lot of the things that we're all used to today, which are competitive advantages for organizations that do personalization really well, would have been considered creepy. So as an organization, you want to move forward and you want to be a bit ahead of everyone else, but maybe not too far ahead where you're being the first one that's maybe shamed for doing something. But I think you kind of have to, if everyone plays the role of the privacy or legal officer, then we don't have innovation. So I kind of always have these battles with our legal and our privacy teams, and that's a good tension to have, I think, because then you're balancing innovation and moving forward with other folks who really think of the opposite side, and that's how I think you get a healthy balance.
And I think echoing that a little bit, if you look at what the voices in that room need to look like, it's a very creative exercise, right? If you look at the first pass of, I'm imagining being in the room, of the data scientist attempt to deliver that personalized basket of goods, it probably wasn't that, right? It was sort of, hey, I've got somebody here and they bought running shoes and running outfit and some power bars. Let's deliver a welcome to running message. Sounds wonderful, nothing creepy at all. You need the creativity in the room to say, wait a minute. If you extend this further, would it mean that we're going to deliver a welcome to the new mom package? Because that's a bit creepier than the welcome to running package. So you need that ability to understand what is being described and then open up the thinking around that to say, what else does this really mean we're doing, and how are some of those ideas, good ideas, bad ideas, dangerous ideas, and flag them, and then open up the discussion. I don't think there's ever a point in time where the answer is black and white. It's a moral judgment that you need to have the ideas brought to the table, discussed, and then decided on.
I'll build on that as well. I ran a research company for a few years, and we actually did an annual Cool or Creepy Index. And what we found is it's changing incredibly quickly, and people that are 15 years younger than me think things are very cool that I would have found creepy, and 2 years later, I think they're cool too. So you have to be specific to different customer groups. You have to also be very conscious of, if you make a misstep and you welcome me to running and I'm not really a runner, I'm probably not going to be all that offended. When it's something more intimate, like you're assuming I'm having a baby and I'm not, especially if you're a teenager, you're taking a bigger risk of alienating and upsetting a customer. So I think that level of judgment also has to come into play when you're having those conversations around the boardroom table.
And I do think you do need to have that conversations. I have mentioned a few times in various other different forums that analytics and analysis, it needs to be a team sport. And you do need to get all those different perspectives around the table so that you actually can figure out what's right, what's appropriate, and what are things that are actually worth pursuing, and what are things that you're just going to set aside for a period of time.
This actually dovetails in very well to a lot of the discussions around diversity too. If you think of the diversity conversations, what's really being said there is, let's bring different points of view to a table so that some of those ideas come out. I could be at a table and I bring a middle-aged to slightly old white guy perspective on things. There's a set of situations where I'm going to say, no, we're gonna come up with this scenario and it's gonna be problematic. And there's a vast set of scenarios where, if it's teenagers, if it's women's health issues, I'm just not going to come up with those for no other reason than I don't experience them myself at this phase of my life and with the reality of who I am. So bringing that broader set of views on the world by age, by gender, by historical background allows other people to say, whoa, wait a minute, I see this happening and that's going to be really interesting. Let's dig in and talk about it.
I was just going to add something. Just because you said the word diversity, and I was thinking of a different type of diversity. And I'll maybe argue against myself, but one of the things I thought was interesting was just diversity in terms of, let's say your news feed, right? So personalization does have that problem as well. I think everyone's probably familiar with that concept of when I go to my LinkedIn, all I see is AI and machine learning and how it's the best thing ever. Because I'm in that circle, right? And if you're in a different field, you might see that content. Same thing with Facebook, and that gets especially problematic with, let's say, political views and things like that. But it's also, I find sometimes even within the retail world, right? So if you think of like an experiment, if someone was on, at some point in time, had some challenges, and then they started going on a diet where they just ate a bunch of Coke and chocolate bars and cookies, and then you kept reinforcing that somehow and caught onto a pattern that didn't exist, how much can we potentially be influencing people's, let's say, health choices through personalized marketing? And so the piece of diversity, it's a challenge, right? Like, how do you introduce new things instead of just continuing to show people what they've seen so far and potentially becoming a vicious circle, versus having some amount of things that people see regardless of whether or not algorithmically it's the best thing to show them. So setting the engagement metrics correctly, if it's just click through and that's all you're trying to maximize, that's potentially dangerous. So thinking about what's the long-term or what's the right objective function to set if I'm trying to optimize someone's newsfeed. Is there some amount that has to be not just based on what you're most likely to engage with going forward.
Thank you. At this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually open it up to the audience to just ask any follow-up questions to things that have been said by the panelists, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Any follow-up questions? One question down here. We have one question up there. So we have two questions. Okay, so if we could get a mic to these two people, we'll answer those questions, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Hi, thanks. So some of the things we've been talking about throughout the course of the day, machine learning, aggregating data, personalization, privacy. One of the things that keeps coming up is we're just reinforcing behaviors, right? We're showing people the same expressed preference that they've already expressed to us. And I think one of the promises of personalization and customer experience is we want to see things that are an order of magnitude or a degree of separation away, or maybe 2 steps away. Like rather than if I buy a wetsuit, rather than showing me wetsuit repair kits, like show me something like I don't know, carrying case or discount travel vouchers, things like that, right? I mean, if you just give me the same preference that I've already indicated, like you're not adding value, right, to my experience. So I guess the question I have is, even when I look at Amazon, right, they do not the best job of that, and they theoretically would have the most data of any retailer online, at least in North America. How do you, like, is that a technical problem? Is that a customer experience problem? Is that even something that really people are registering, right, as an opportunity? Maybe I'll leave it at that.
Anyone want to take that?
I can maybe take a first stab
Sure.
at that. So at Wayfair, one of the challenges we're working on right now is trying to expand into new categories that we're not really well known for. So everyone probably knows we sell furniture, so sofas and futons and things like that. You might think of Wayfair. When you think of our TAM, our total addressable market, a big focus is on like renovation goods, fridges, appliances, kitchen floor tiling, things of that nature. Which, when you think of what's the best communication to show someone, it's not actually always immediately cross-selling the item that's directly related to what they're looking for. I can say at a high level how we're approaching this. So there's a few things we're doing. One is approaching the problem as a longer-term problem. So when you think of a lot of the techniques you might use, like a market basket analysis, it's very short-term. It's saying in this exact basket, what else is very common. So that works for like ketchup and mustard or hot dogs and buns. But then if you go further, if you think of the new categories we're expanding into, especially within the renovation space, that's a different type of problem. It's very, it's very sequential. So when you're in a renovation project, there's items you buy, and you buy them in a particular sequence. And you could argue, actually, all of F&D, furniture and decor, is the same. So I moved to Boston about 9 months ago. I had to furnish a whole place, and there was a very natural sequence in how I did things. Another area in machine learning that has natural sequences is language, right? Language has a very natural sequences in how we use words. And so we've borrowed a lot from natural language processing and something called LSTM, long short-term memory approaches, which are basically looking at, given the sequence of things you've done so far, what do we think you're gonna do next in a broader context besides what you just did right now? So that's kind of one way we're tackling it. On top of that, we're layering on you can think of it as like an optimization approach at a very high level. Without getting into detail, it's kind of saying, if I want to talk to people about fridges and no one thinks of Wayfair as a place to buy a fridge, there's still a data-driven way to say who are the next best set of people that could potentially be in market for a fridge, given I know at an aggregate level at any given time, which that part isn't that hard to find, at any given time there's this many people looking for a fridge, so there's 300 million people in the US, a fridge lasts about 10 years, you can work backwards and find out the number of people on any given day looking for a fridge. And if you phrase the question as, I know there are this many people looking for a fridge each day, and can I build a model that says who are the ones that are most likely, and then speak to them about fridges, even though they're looking for sofas? that might be a better ROI of what we speak to them about. So yeah, that's a challenge. And a lot of times people want to keep doing the market basket analysis because it gives you really good short-term metrics. So that goes back to that objective function. If it's just click through, you may actually be hurting yourself in the long term. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
I think one thing I'd layer in from a business to business perspective is this actually maps very well to the way that if you think of a B2B salesperson, for example, they very much think in terms of what Masoum identified as essentially a persona, right? It's not this person has this basket, it's this person has this life situation. And in a B2B environment, okay, they're a CMO who is trying to expand into a new market. Well, that persona is going to give you a whole set of things that you're looking for. It's a really hard problem to solve because the data goes from relatively workable in a basket environment to ungodly and messy as you're trying to identify a persona, which I think is why in a B2C scenario, we see the world as it is, and it's a little bit basket focused right now. In a B2B scenario, it's mainly done by humans that take a bit of data and layer on intuition to say, this feels about right, this is this kind of a persona. But really where we're going there is, can we identify the people we're interacting with? Can we map a persona to them? And with that persona, can we figure out what type of fridge we would want to put in front of them?
There might be an opportunity to do that more from a consumer perspective as well, because building on the renovation example, if you know from the basket that I'm renovating my kitchen and you think, okay, so if you're renovating a kitchen or if you're renovating at all, what else is going on in your life? Well, you're probably a little stressed. You might be getting more headaches. If you're renovating a kitchen and you have kids, how are you feeding them? So what other products can you be delivering beyond the more obvious ones? And sometimes your business itself can deliver on that. Sometimes you can strike a partnership with a meal delivery company and help deliver on your consumer's need in that moment in time in a way that will surprise and delight them and also make them a bit more loyal to your business longer term.
And then I think the other piece on top of that is we tend to be very fixated when we talk about personalization on an individual. But in reality, most of us don't live completely alone in a bubble, and that one person in the household is the person who purchased things related to the car. Perhaps somebody else in the household is the one that's doing the groceries and purchasing for the entire household. But when you're thinking about personalization, I think we sometimes want to change the lens a little bit and not who's that one individual, but start to answer questions around the household, which is a much tougher nut to crack. However, with AI and machine learning and graph theory and all kinds of other fun things that we have, you can actually pull that lens out a little bit, and you lose precision, but you gain a much wider perspective on there.
If I could just add one more lens to that. I think when I think of personalization, another useful way to break it down is, I think someone said the word situation. So who you are as a person and what's the situation you're in. So one is time variant and one's time invariant, and that's pretty important. So a lot of the low-hanging fruit that we're talking about is kind of who you are. So are you a dog owner? What's your lifestyle? Are you high income? Are you tech savvy? And we can kind of gather all that stuff, and it's not time invariant in that you can change, but it's, let's say, slow changing, right? So if we're doing a good job there, those characteristics shouldn't change day to day. And those are actually easier to model for the most part. What's actually going a layer above is situational. So given this point in time, what are you currently in market for, which could change tomorrow and it could change the day after. So understanding the situation versus just who you are as a person is probably the most important a more important piece, especially when you're trying to sell, let's say, non-durable goods, durable goods that last longer. So I started more in retail, and there, because you're selling, let's say, groceries, you're gonna buy groceries every week, I just kind of need to know who you are, and I know you're gonna come back, so the time to next purchase isn't that far away. If I'm selling furniture, the timing is actually the most important thing. So knowing if you need it in general isn't that helpful. So everyone who basically owns a house and doesn't rent is gonna need to buy a fridge eventually. There's no such thing as a fridge buyer profile. That's not that helpful. What's helpful is time to. So can I model the time to when you're going to actually need to buy a fridge? So, I mean, to me that wasn't obvious. How I started in retail and it was always fast-moving goods, but it was a big realization when I switched industries that the situation is actually sometimes much more important and challenging than rather than just who you are.
Thank you, Masoum. Hold on to your question. We're going to actually just wrap up this section, then move into another one. But if there's an opportunity to ask it, I will come down to you so we can ask the question. So just before we move on, a couple things that came up in the conversation. So you were just talking, Masoum, specifically around situation, right, and understanding that importance. And for you, as an interesting learning as you went into this new role at Wayfair. We also talked before about understanding that there's personas, right? And those personas are interesting. Steve, you mentioned that specifically, right? We need to understand those personas. But then Jeff also mentioned that sometimes it's actually bigger than an individual we're looking at. We're looking at something that might be a household or some other level, right? That's bigger than an individual. And then I guess, conversation also ran to thinking about this as a team sport, right? So as you're starting to think about experiences that you want to create, making sure that you have the right people in the room and you're having the right conversations, because that's going to help you as a large organization or even a small organization, right? To understand where you should be. And you need to have those conversations, but you probably want people who are pushing and people who are pulling you back, right? To make sure that you're advancing as an organization. And then kind of Steve, you mentioned a bit about not sucking, right? And personalization can help you to not suck, right? It could also do more, but let's start there maybe, and then kind of see where we can keep going. And then, Alison, you kicked things off really when you talked about how this is almost similar to building a relationship, right, with your customer. So as you think about experiences you want to create, think about that as a progression over time, right? You don't need to ask everything right away, right? You don't need all the answers. And leave something for the great reveal later, right? Yeah, okay. So at this point, I want to move into the second topic. And for us, in conversations before, we talked about a few different things. But one of the things that really came up was technologies and understanding, what are the long-term implications of some of the technologies that are available now or potentially will be available soon, right? And starting to think about how those would actually impact the customer experiences that we would want to reimagine in the future. So this is something that we talked a little bit about as a group before, and for this one, I've asked Steve to kick things off and share some of his thoughts on, again, technologies that we may use in the future and their potential impacts.
So I'm going to totally disappoint you, Everton. I have no idea, like none whatsoever. I'm always reminded in sort of these kind of open-ended questions of one of the adages that I'll steal from somebody who unfortunately I don't remember and can't credit, but things change.
That was me, Steve.
As the great Everton once said, things change less in a year than you'd expect and more in a decade than you'd expect. And that's proven true over the last 20 years. You think a lot of stuff is just around the corner, and then it disappoints, it's not quite here this year. You look back over a decade and say, wow, that was significant where we've come from 2009 to 2019 or whatever the transition is. So in looking at the long-term implications of the technologies that we're working with, you can't just say, okay, here's how we're going to extrapolate. That ends up being wrong. You need to come back to some of the foundations of what we're dealing with here. And experiences are all about the people who are having those experiences. We are a human society. We create experiences for humans. So we've got to look at what humans are. And I always try and come back to three foundational things that define us as a species. We are social. So much of the experience is all about creating and managing the bonds that we have with each other, whether those are familial, whether those are relationships, friendships, sexual. We are a social species and relationships matter a ton. But secondly, in context of that, kind of 1B, our decisions on what is correct, what is desirable, what is interesting are validated through that group. As Alison said earlier, things that are creepy in year one might be totally normal for year two. If you look at things like online dating, it's all about creating relationships. I was dating in a period where online dating existed, but you always denied that. You'd always fabricate a story of how did we meet. And now it's just, just normal. You're at a conference, whatever, Tinder. I'm fascinated to see all the young people in my office. I'm like, how does this really work? Walk me through the psychology. I'm married. I'm out of it. I would be a disaster if I had to head back into this world right now. But we're a social species. You've got to count that in as you're building this map of the future and customer experience. Second, we seek new experiences. A lot about humanity is this interesting dynamic between consistency and comfort and novelty and discomfort. And if you look at human behavior, it's a balance between those. When we're discomfortable, we always seek consistency and comfort. When we get too bored, we want to break out of the shell and do something new. And that dynamic affects a lot of stuff. It affects, why do we travel? Why do we go to a new place? Why do we go to a place? This is fascinating. You go to the islands in the South Pacific, they're the same damn thing as the islands in the Caribbean. But we go further because then it's novel-er. It's different. The people who are over in Asia are like, I wouldn't go to Fiji. I'd come all the way to Caribbean because it's different. It's novel. Like, we seek things that are different to us. We seek things that appear different to the social groups we're trying to talk with. If you look at language in teenagers, if you look at fashion, there's no right answer on them. It's an effort to consistently appear different and act different and seek a new experience. So second part, we seek new experiences. And third, we seek meaning. We look at our lives as a journey, and this is sort of Masoum's point on sort of where you are as a person and what you're doing. These are journeys that we see ourselves on, some of which we want to learn guitar. Great, it's a self-motivated journey. Or I am a parent. Kind of self-motivated, you're kind of forced into it by a couple of young gangsters. So we're on these journeys, and we're trying to deepen the meaning that we get from it, either in life, in learning, and in work. And I think it's those three things that will guide the experiences that we all try and put in front of the consumers and customers that we seek to have in the future. But again, guided by the fact that it's very unknowable what those dynamics are going to be 2 and 3 and 4 years from now.
Thank you. Anybody want to add on top of that? That was deep, Steve. Deep.
Sorry.
I could take a less deep stab at that. So, how could customer experience change with new technology? I'll take the more 5 years from now, or even now today. I think AR and VR are going to be really big in customer experience. If you think of what shopping for furniture was like 10 years ago, it's actually not a great customer experience. So when you buy furniture, you usually don't know the brand of the product, right? So I don't know the brand of this, and brand isn't really associated with furniture products. You usually don't have reviews or any kind of, if I'm incentivized to sell this, I can sell this to you, and if it sucks, it sucks. You're not going to really be able to do anything. If you went to your local furniture store, you don't have a lot of selection, right? And it kind of feels like you're buying a used car, right? Like you're not going to go there every week, so you don't really know how much you should be paying, and you're usually overpaying. And if you don't live in an urban city like most of us do here, but if you don't, there's not a lot of selection, right? So if you wanted a particular type of product that is very niche and a different color, you just wouldn't be able to have that. And that kind of sucks. So most people want to have a home that's nice, that they can call their own, that is personable and different, and we're all seeking to be different. So how can we make that happen? How can we make that a reality? So technology enables us to do that. And we've gotten sort of halfway there. There's still some challenges, right? So when you're buying furniture, you want to sit on it. You want to be able to look at it. You want to be able to feel how it might feel. And you obviously can't do that. You can't have that human experience fully, at least, when you're just clicking, scrolling through our app or a website. But we can try to get better, right? And that's what we're trying to do. So we're thinking of, we have, let's say, a bunch of technology that we're currently developing that's around, one is you can go somewhere and see a product you like at your friend's house or somewhere, take a picture, upload it, and we'll tell you if we have that SKU, what SKU it is, and if we don't, what's the closest item that looks to that. So recognize the object, tries to recognize the SKU, and then gives you either that item or recommended items. The other challenge is I don't know if this thing's going to fit in my house. I want to imagine how it looks. So we're taking every single product, turning it into, you can imagine a 3D model, a CGI version of it, And then allowing people to, with their smartphone, imagine or actually it almost looks like what it would look like. Obviously, that's not perfect yet. That technology isn't perfect yet. But I don't see how in 10 years from now, with a bunch of super smart people working on this problem, we won't be able to solve that, right? I think we will be able to solve that. You'll be able to put on a headset and have an experience that's really similar or close to going to your local furniture store and buying stuff. So that's I think like tangible things that will change probably in 5 years from now.
To add on to that, I'm going to go even a little more technical on what started as a very philosophical question. I think as we're moving forward, we're going to have an expectation that things are going to become even more and more frictionless in terms of our customer experience. That I will be able to, using chatbots, be able to order a pizza without actually having to load up an app. I want to be able to just talk, have it order the pizza, know where I live, have it deliver. I don't want to have to go through the hassle of installing somebody's app, figuring out how it works, all those sorts of things. I also think that various different engines and technologies are going to become more and more and more integrated. And that's going to impact our not just our customer experience, but our consumer experience, right? Like it's not too far off where you could say, Alexa, drive the dog to the groomer, then Roomba out the car. And all of those disconnected bits and pieces will all be able to somehow connect and integrate to each other to be able to do that through no user interface whatsoever beyond just the human voice. And there's the understanding and the connectivity. And that's coming. It sounds very futuristic, but the interconnectivity of the fabric of connecting all these engines together is really kind of the next problem that we have to solve. And at that point then, when the technology truly becomes the Jarvis companion, now the whole engagement experience changes around everything.
Okay, all right. So maybe just a follow-up there in terms of a couple things. So you talked about the technology and integrations, right? So maybe if you could just maybe share any, whoops, lost my pen. It's okay, don't worry, I'll take it later. So Jeff, I know that you've got experience in terms of setting up organizations with their technologies. So specifically, some of the work you've done with Canadian Tire and some of those organizations. So as people start to think about integrating these technologies, is there any advice, right, that you would pass on?
Yeah, so one piece of kind of tactical advice would be that you have to recognize that your consumers are going to engage and identify themselves different ways through different channels that they engage with you with. The information that you give when you drop off your car at the garage part of a Canadian Tire is different from how you log in on the website to do an e-commerce buy, which is different from how when you're presenting your scene points, you're collecting information that way, which is different from how when you're just walking through the point of sale and you're using your credit card to be able to connect through. It's all the same consumer, but you have completely different ways that you're engaging and connecting, and you actually are going to have to spend some time, energy, effort, and money to figure out how do you actually wrangle all of those pieces together in the back end through graph databases and other bits and pieces of technology to actually then enable the analytics and enable the customer experience that you're looking to translate into.
The one thing I'd add to that, just kind of riffing a little bit on your points, Jeff, is if you think of the customer experience, we have this sort of static view. You're the pizza shop in your example, and you've got an online experience, you've got an in-store experience. It's wonderful. How are you going to evolve that? the thing I would encourage everyone to think about, though, is the amount of experience disintermediation that's happening now and is happening in the future is dramatic. So to take the pizza shop example, great, you're a pizza shop, you work on your decor, you work on the ambiance, you work on your website, and Uber Eats comes along and says, no, we're a transportation app for the pizzas. The experience people will have is go to Uber Eats and order, today I want fish and chips, tomorrow I want pizza, and they disintermediate the customer experience. And then Google Home comes along and says, no, we're a voice app that will then, you just say, hey, Google, I want a pizza, and it will take care of getting the pizza through Uber Eats from that pizza shop. So who owns the experience and how that experience is pushed forward? The pizza shop still needs to deliver the data and the shipment ultimately via Uber Eats to Google Home, but it's a different experience task than putting nice ambiance and a nice website out there. You need to understand that experience disintermediation that is happening very quickly in today's world.
Yeah, if I can, that's actually a super interesting point. Never really thought of it that way. But one thing I think of is like, that reminds me of like the medium by which things happen, right? So going back to some of the things you were saying, our medium today is pretty early and pretty limited, right? So most of how we interact with, let's say, Uber or the app is through like typing, right? Which is super inefficient. Like you have 10 hands and we're not really designed to do that task well. And then voice is more natural, right? So that's a better medium. You tell it what you want to do and it figures out what you're trying to say. And it's mostly a function of medium, right? So if we can get better mediums to communicate with machines, and things always sound crazy in a short amount of time, but in a long amount of time, they become really normal. There's some stuff being done right now where you can think about something and that produces a particular pattern that can be recognized. And these are really small tasks like turn the light on. You can think that thought. We can recognize that pattern and we can turn on the light. So that's doable today. But you can imagine a future in 20 years from now where you can have more complex thoughts. And that's where the customer experience almost becomes, like I think Amazon says this, the best customer experience is no customer experience, where you didn't even have to call Netflix to get it canceled. They just know you thought that, let's say somehow, or they recognize that you were being double billed and removed it for you. But yeah, I think the medium will be a big piece, and some of the earlier conversations today about 5G and things like that, the underlying technology will change the medium by which we communicate, by which we express what we want to other entities, whether it's the pizza store or anything else that's more complex.
It does make for a very interesting discussion around who ultimately owns the customer. And using the pizza example, if your pizza shows up cold or an hour later than planned, is Pizza getting blamed for that, even though I ordered it on Uber? And how is Pizza? Do I control that or even know that I have an annoyed customer because it wasn't my person that delivered it? So the onus it puts on the business and the brand to really understand and have the visibility into when a customer experience that is outside of their control works well or doesn't, so that they can continue to address the issue and build the loyalty is a fascinating and challenge and no easy answers.
And I think, too, we need to treat, in many ways, customers as, in this case, to walk back a statement I made earlier, customers in this case are not necessarily human. And we've lived this reality for a while. Anyone that has a website out realizes that their customers there are essentially twofold. One is the human who is going to come to the website and look at the content and click around. Two is Google. You are building that website so that the customer, Google, can crawl that website, understand what's going on, and say, it's a pizza shop that's down in Etobicoke with these things on offer. And extending that further and saying, okay, well, if your customer is Uber Eats or your customer is Google Home, what experience do they need in order to have you as a part of that value chain?
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask the audience if they have any questions, any follow-up questions for the panelists. So while we're getting the mics to the people who have their hands up, who would like to ask questions, I'm going to just go back through some of the things that we've talked about. So you may want to follow up on the idea here. We talked about experience disintermediation, right? In terms of those different pieces getting pulled apart and having multiple organizations or party actually delivering a service And then that can bring some interesting challenges for the future. Alison, you specifically mentioned like, okay, who do you blame, right? When things go wrong, right? One neck to choke, you don't have that necessarily going forward.
Blame the cloud.
Blame it on the, yeah, you could do that for sure. Yeah, well, talking about Alexa, which you just mentioned, we talked about communication, right, in different mediums for the future, right? So as we start to think about that, we have some right now, and we may have different ones. We may need to just advance some of the ones that we currently have to just make it better, right? A better customer experience going forward. Something else that we talked about a bit here was just as we think about those technologies and integrating, right? There's some things that we can just keep in mind, right? That will just help us advance faster as we go forward. And Steve, you kicked it off initially, really talking about some things that are just common to the human experience going forward. And yeah, it's hard for us to really predict. Again, we didn't know necessarily 10 years ago some of the things that we have in place right now, but a few things that you mentioned haven't changed, right? So the idea of, again, you talked about social, right? A desire for new experiences and novel. So if we can think about those things that are fundamental or principles of the human experience, then we can potentially start to apply these new technologies in ways that will actually create new value going forward and then potentially lead to new opportunities. Okay, so we've got mics out in the audience. So down at below, yes?
So we've heard a lot about commercial transactions. I think a lot of us, all of us really, many of the important transactions in our lives are public services. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how these ideas apply to healthcare, education, transit in the public realm.
That's a hard one. I think you've got the same challenge of all of the things we've discussed. You're delivering an experience. You've got to balance the data you have with the experience you deliver, et cetera, et cetera. The experiences are disintermediated in a fairly similar way. The challenge there is the lack of clarity that the dollar provides. If you look at business, the battle for experience disintermediation between Google Home and Uber Eats and the pizza shop, we know what's going on there. It's a vicious battle for dollars all along that value chain, and everyone is trying to win based on very clear metrics. The challenge you have in a lot of public service work is there isn't that clarity there. It's much vaguer in terms of who needs to do what to win what in the public service battle. There's electoral votes that are going on. There's individuals that are each being compensated in slightly less market ways. So I think it will happen, but that lack of clarity that the dollar provides is just going to make it a lot slower.
I can say the two things that I think will impact that space. One, I think, is education. I think we'll see, there's a lot of opportunity to improve education, I think. It's like with MOOCs and Coursera and things like that, and people being able to, basically, if you have a smartphone in your pocket, you can, if you wanted to, really learn almost anything and continue to learn for the rest of your life for $0. And so I think we'll see some changes in terms of how the customer, which is a student of a public school, right? You're really a customer and you're paying property, like taxes for that. And hopefully people will maybe challenge, what are we getting in return for that as a customer? And we're seeing lots more public initiatives that are making data open, right? So a lot more open data initiatives where the City of Toronto would release a whole bunch of data and let people create value out of it, whether it's for an enterprise because you found some way to monetize it and sell it to someone else, or whether it's just for the greater good because you found out that something is inefficient in terms of how bikes are being something you could find. So I think there's definitely opportunities. I'm not from that space, I can't speak to it too much, but I think education is definitely one.
I would say healthcare is absolutely an opportunity as well. If you think of someone that's going through a disease, spending a lot of time, or has an emergency and is waiting in an emergency room, or if you have a family member that's going for a surgery, hours can go by without you knowing what's going on, and that's a terrifying patient and family experience. So if you think about an ability to leverage data and without the human interaction, be able to keep the family aware of what's going on. If you're a patient waiting in emergency and wondering how many more hours you're going to have to wait, if you can communicate without having to have more staff, communicate the wait times, provide some sort of comfort and ongoing communication. I think there's a huge opportunity there. I'm not from the space either. It just feels like when you think about data and technology's ability to address pain points, there are a lot of pain points and unknowns and fear involved anytime you're in a hospital or battling a disease.
I think part of it is not just related to technology. There has to be discussions around governance, around access to data, around privacy, around a number of those other factors. Having spent many years working with Canada Post over the years and dealing with the challenges associated with, no, we're not even going to tell you what the address is that you're going to be shipping to, creates its own challenges. So those discussions have to happen in order for the technology to be able to be applied. So I think there has to be a push for some of those things to be dealt with. And you have to still have the privacy by design, as Dr. Kavukian and other people put in place many years ago. That has to underpin everything, but it can't just become the default answer to everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another question over here.
Yep. Hi. Really interesting discussions. I'm more of just a quick question and poll of the panel. As I reimagine the customer experience from my side, and I'm on the risk management side, but thinking a little bit down the road, and you've all kind of made points. If I'm constructing the narrative, and going to Alison's point, I think about the relationship and the building the relationship. If you had to pick between the story of us or the story of now, which would it be and why?
Can you clarify what you mean by that? Sorry, I'd lost the question there.
Okay, so if I'm thinking about the marketing and my customer's experience, should I be focusing on the story, developing a story of us, or, and I think Masoum made a good point, that it's the story of now, right? The timing is what's probably most important as far as that experience goes, and I know it depends perhaps on this or that. I'm just sort of interested to see down the road, do you see with the technologies coming, is it more important about developing us kind of story, or I'm aware of the moment?
Mm-hmm. So just to make sure, and so the us being like that relationship,
Yes.
right? And the now being like, okay, I totally understand the context that you're in, right? I've got that knowledge, and here, this is something that I'm going to say or provide or message.
I think you're probably going to see a dynamic where you've got both ends of that spectrum covered. If you think about an identity-based brand like a Harley, for example, that's a story of us. You need to find people at that moment in their life, and you need to have them identify that they are Harley Davidson people. And nothing else matters apart from that identification with a brand and where that fits into their life narrative and life story. Whereas if you look at an Amazon, no, they don't care. It's all about now. It's all about what needs to go into your basket next, and can we ship it to you in the next 24 hours? And both businesses are equally valid. Some things that we do in life are about the identity of who we are, and those are story of us businesses that serve us, and some things are their transactions. You need to get from point A to point B, and you need to eat some food, and you need to have products shipped to your house, and those are very much story of now things. So I think there's room for both businesses.
If you're in the business of risk, and risk can be defined a bunch of different ways, so I gravitate more towards there's an urgency to it. If there is a risk involved, it's more about how do you help me through this quickly, and how do I have trust in you that you will solve the problem when things have gone horribly wrong. So first it would be a sense of urgency, but there also has to be a bit of a story of us, because I have to trust that you're going to be the person when I most need you, in the business when I most need you, that will be there and help me through something that I'm probably not comfortable managing through on my own. So I think it's time first, but the story of us is going to be important. I wouldn't have brought you in to be my risk expert in the first place.
Just to understand, so when you say risk, is it like insurance, or what type of industry? Got it. Okay. Right. So I'd just say at the high level, when I think of situational, like what context the person is in versus who they are, I don't really think it's one or the other. I think they're one of the, like they're literally, we need both to succeed. I just think in the past it's been a bit easier to understand who people are in a static point frame and like kind of define someone. But I think all the time people have different situations and companies that can capture both of those correctly and say, this is who you are and this is the situation that you're in. And then orient all of their, let's say, marketing touch points in this case, but it could be other touch points around who they are and the situation that they're in. I like to use the word time variant, but think of every problem as a time variant problem because nothing is static. And think of it as contextual. So there's approaches, that, when we think of machine learning, there's approaches that are contextual, like contextual multi-arm bandit versus a non-contextual one. And I don't think the static view ever actually works. I think it's just simpler. And so we've done that historically, and it's easier to do. But if there's enough data and capabilities to have who you are and what situation you're in, I'd always think go for the latter. Yeah.
I would say it's the engagement. And by the engagement, like using an anecdote, we're fickle and we have long memories. There's a electronics chain that my mother-in-law will drive an extra 45 minutes to bypass to be able to go and buy other things because she had a bad experience there 7 years ago. And it's about that engagement and that experience. It's not just about what's the product that's being sold, it's how did you feel through that. And as a result, I think it's actually less about the now and more about that trust and feeling and how did that whole thing go. Because we've got choice and we're fickle and we'll go wherever we're treated best. So leave a customer hanging online for 45 minutes while they're on hold, they're gone. Never come back. Regardless of the fact that you may be the cheapest person or cheapest thing that's being offered.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I'm just looking into the audience. I'm not sure if we have mics with other people who have questions. Yes, no? Okay. All right. So it doesn't appear that we have any, actually, I'll just wait. Does anybody else have a question? We've got about another 2 minutes. So we have time for one question and probably one answer from the panel.
Hi there. I'm Raj with the Smith School of Business, current MBA student there. And we have a really interesting project. And we're looking at the customer experience, reimagining it in terms of a student. But with a place like a school, in a way, they're kind of a broker between two different agents. There's the students, and then there's the employers thereafter. So it's a really unique customer journey because you have customers that are students, but you also have future employers on the other hand. Can you speak to any type of situation you've come across where the customer isn't just one demographic? There might be customers on two ends of a transaction. And how do you go about defining that type of customer journey when you have multiple parties?
So this sounds like a big question. And I know that we're coming close to the end. So I just asked the panel if you've got maybe 30 seconds to answer that you'd like to share. And then I would encourage you, if you would like to have a longer conversation, to reach out to each of the panelists, okay?
I can quickly answer that. We have that exact scenario. We have the carriers who we're dealing with, TELUS and AT&T and Bell and blah, 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 who are our customers, also a disintermediary. And then we have the end people who are actually using our products. And we actually have to represent both sides of that. And really, all that I can say is you have to actually treat each group differently depending upon who they are and what their requirements are. But you need to understand what their requirements are in order to figure out how to treat them. And it's really just kind of that simple.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So that brings our panel to a close. I'd like to say thank you to each of our panelists for the last hour and 10 minutes and the insights that you've given us over that time. Audience, can I just get a round of applause for our panel? Yeah.